The Pittsburgh Steelers are bringing in linebacker Kwon Alexander in for an interview. What does that mean, and what does it mean for the linebacker position, as well as their defensive plans for this upcoming season? We'll have that and more, especially Mason Rudolph's potential return, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's a Tuesday edition with your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and definitely on YouTube. Watch this video on YouTube, and if you do like it, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day because we're your team every day. We're going to take a step back from the draft talk because we've been doing draft and a lot of post-draft and rookie camp because there's a lot of excitement about this rookie class. Instead, we're going to talk about a potential move, well, two potential moves that the Steelers could make to finalize their free agency plans. We've all been talking about the excitement about what Omar Khan has done, the aggression to fill positions, to get certain veterans, to make moves necessary to make this look like a more complete roster heading into training camp. And it appears, according to reports, Adam Schefter led this, I believe, and he tweeted out earlier in the day on Monday that the Steelers were bringing in Kwon Alexander for an interview in the evening of Monday. And as of now, of me recording this, we've seen no other reporting. Now, Kwon Alexander did tweet out the eyeballs emojis, which means usually it's just the player's way of just stoking interest on the internet. And of course, everyone's saying Steeler with the Squidward meme. But let's talk about what this would actually mean for the Steelers for a second here. Now, for those who might not remember, Kwon Alexander, is a guy with a lot of NFL experience. He'll be 29 when the season starts this year. He's just under 6'1", around that range right there. When he came into the league, he was a fourth-round pick from the Buccaneers back in 2015. Developed into a solid player for them, played with the Niners, had some really bad injuries with the Buccaneers and the Niners, then bounced around with the Saints, and then eventually landed on the Jets last year, where he did start 12 games. And I think this is similar to what the Steelers were doing with Cole Holcomb and Elandon Roberts, the two other linebackers they signed in free agency. Kwon Alexander isn't a superstar. He's not even a star. But I think he gives you a solid role player, a guy who can come in, you can trust. He's going to be a veteran. You're going to be able to tell him, hey, we need you here, we need you there. Learn, get used to the defense, learn to communicate, and we want you to just be in the right spot at the right time and make the tackle when the play's on the line. That is who I think they're getting in a Kwon Alexander. Now, back in Kwon Alexander's, I guess you could say his prime in his younger years, Kwon Alexander put up some interesting numbers at times when you go back and look at some of the things that he was doing when he first got into the league. One, he had a 3 interception year in 2017. He had 4 breakups in 2020. So there were times where he looked like, hey, maybe he's more of a cover. He can help it as a coverage linebacker a little bit more than some other guys. But he hasn't been that guy too much of late. He had 1 pass breakup last year, 1 pass breakup the year before that. He also had an interception in 2021 as well. I don't expect him to come in and just be the ultimate cover linebacker. If anyone thinks that that's what he's going to be, I don't think that's what I don't think that's who he is. I think exactly who he is to come in, give the Steelers a competition between 3 veteran linebackers. Then you bring in Mark Robinson, and then you see, okay, who are your 2 starters? Who's your rotational guy? And if Kwon Alexander signs, because he hasn't signed yet, you'd have at least 3 vets you can trust on. You're hoping that the second-year Mark Robinson guy can step up and make some improvements and at least work his way onto the field a little bit more. And then, of course, as we've talked about, maybe you're probably taking some of those guys off because you've gotten a safety like Keanu Neal to add to your secondary who can kind of bunch down as a dime backer there. But what I think Kwon Alexander is definitely going to bring, he's going to bring a guy that's not afraid to stick his nose in the paint, in the gridiron. I think he's a guy with Elandon Roberts, with Cole Holcomb. All 3 of those guys are not afraid to get their hands dirty. They're going to go in, they're going to stuff the run. And I think that's mostly what the Steelers need out of this one position. We've talked about how if you're looking at the one weakness on this defense, it's kind of in that intermediate middle part of the field. We still don't know who's going to be their starting slot corner. They let go of Arthur Maulet last week. Chandon Sullivan was their only signing there. They didn't draft a slot corner, so there's a big question there. We talked about the potential of a Corey Trice maybe being asked to try to do that as a big nickel, or maybe that's DeMonte KZ's role. We've talked about that possibility, but between slot corner and linebacker, that continues to kind of be the big question mark. And I want to get to my point here because I also don't think it might not be too big of a question mark to compromise the Steelers defense from being a very good to even great unit this year. But sticking with what we're talking about here, I think the Steelers recognize right now, and as a lot of teams are in the NFL, linebackers are becoming trickier and trickier to be a group that you assess and you bring into your organization. Either you find the superstar like they did with Ryan Shazier, like the Ravens did by trading to get Roquan Smith. You find the guy that can cover and play physical run stuffing football, or you find a guy that's going to fit that one specific role of coverage or run stuffing, and you try to isolate them from being too much of a liability from their weakness. And that's just, I think, a reality in today's game. You look at how fast a lot of teams are, how much passing goes on, and we've also talked about how some teams have started the surge back to running the football if they don't have the premier quarterback. I think the Steelers are kind of in a position where they're not going to try to pay top dollar just to get one linebacker right now. They didn't try to draft a linebacker super high this year, or even at all in the NFL draft this year, even though some of us were looking at Jack Campbell like, oh man, he could be the guy. But of course, the Lions picked him 18th overall. Steelers were never going to pick him at 17, or even especially when they traded up at 14. I don't think they would have picked him at 32, maybe at 49. But I think 32, they still go Joey Porter Jr. there. But I think the bottom line is this. The Steelers, we think of the Steelers, we think of great linebacker play over the best teams. You think of James Ferrier, you go back to Jack Ham and Jack Lambert. You think about the teams that have done that. The Steelers still have great outside linebackers, but today they're more traditional edge rushers. I think that the role, at least for now in the Steelers defense, is you need these guys to just be tough, physical vets that fill as good role players. They're not going to be the guys that make the big plays. They're going to be the lunch pail guys. They're going to be the guys that come in, do the dirty work, and when they make the occasional play, that's what's going to get you excited. But I think that this is something that Steelers fans are going to probably latch on to a little bit here, because that's very much the whole blue collar aesthetic that we've always talked about that Steelers fans are. And I think that could be a good thing. We remember Steelers fans, they've latched on to guys who weren't superstars, but were good players, or guys that were at least putting in an honest effort. Remember how the city got behind James Conner when he took over for Le'Veon Bell. Now, part of that's also because James Conner was a Pitt guy, and he made a good step up to the NFL. But this city does appreciate hard-working players who kind of just put their nose to the dirt and just get to work. And I think that's what they're getting in all three of these linebackers. Kwon Alexander is a guy that brings a lot of spirit to the locker room. We talked about how Elandon Roberts and Cole Holcomb were guys that had C's on their chests for their previous teams. This could all, to me, be a move about getting a linebacker who just fits that ideal perspective of, hey, in the middle part of the defense, you're responsible, you know how to communicate, you don't leave open gaps, you don't leave open, you make sure you at least try to get to your spots so that your role is fulfilled in the scheme of the defense. And when you're in the locker room, you're psyching people up. You're being part of the environment. You're boosting the morale and the energy of the rest of the team, and let the superstars on this defense, because there are superstars on this defense. TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Cam Heyward. Maybe Patrick Peterson will have a big year. He had 5 interceptions last year. Maybe you get an emergence from Joey Porter Jr. or Keanu Benton. Alex Highsmith had double-digit sacks last year, and Larry Ogunjobi had a pretty good year as well once he started to get a little bit healthier. So there's plenty of other guys to mix that up. And I want to talk about how I think that could play very much into what the Steelers are trying to do, at least for this year, for their defense. We'll get to that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so don't go anywhere. But first, before we do any of that, I want to talk to you guys about FanDuel. FanDuel, of course, is the number one sports book in America. And with the NBA playoffs at the conference final stage, there's no better time to get on FanDuel, especially if you're going to be a new customer, because they now have the no sweat first bet. What's the no sweat first bet? Well, it's simple as this. You make your first bet with FanDuel, and if you miss, you can win back to up to $1,000 in bonus bets. That's right. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, sign up today, and you can claim your no sweat first bet. You could bet on who's going to score more points, LeBron James or Jokic, who's going to be the bigger star, Jason Tatum or Jimmy Butler, all those things in basketball. And they also do baseball. They also do hockey. So many ways to make money, and that's right with FanDuel, America's number one sports book. So don't miss your shot at the no sweat first bet, up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you join FanDuel today. And just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, America's number one sports book. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's continue this conversation about the defense a little bit here, because I think that there's still the aspect of wondering, well, wait a minute, Chris, you're saying that this is just another solid veteran linebacker, but don't you need a playmaker at linebacker? I mean, the best Steelers defense had them, and I agree. There is still a role for that in the NFL. But I think across the board, it's shrinking, because people know that linebacker, either you're, like I said, that star player that can fit both roles, or you're a role player who can fit one of those roles and has the potential to be picked on by the opposing offense for, one thing or the other. Either you're a cover linebacker that's not as contributing as much in the run, or you're a run stuffing linebacker that's more of a liability in the pass game. And there's very few guys that fill both so well, which is why those guys are also extremely valuable. So, going back to this role, though, I think the Steelers were in a position where they know they don't need to force it right now. This is still a rebuilding nucleus that's looking to create their next championship run of years where they're one of the top contenders in the NFL. And who knows, maybe that's starting sooner rather than later. I actually am of the opinion, as we talked about yesterday with Alan Saunders, the Steelers aren't as far out as some people make them seem. I actually think the Steelers can be right in the mix so long as they stay healthy. They would have been in the playoffs if TJ Watt didn't miss 2 months of football. But looking at how this defense is constructed, and we all know that this team still next year, even though the offense does need to take steps forward, this still needs to be a team that wins with great defense. Like I was saying before, I think you have enough star power at other positions and just talent at other positions that you can live with your guys at the linebacker spot, especially off-ball linebacker, guys in the middle part of the field, being just decent. Just don't get exposed. One thing that I go back to all the time is when I look back to what Minkah Fitzpatrick did for the Steelers defense in 2019. You go back to 2017 and then 2018, and you can see the progression that the Steelers defense was making in those years. In 2017, they came in and they brought in they were bringing in help, and they were getting help there. But in 2018, you saw more big plays being let up in the passing game. They still finished top 10 overall in pass defense. But in 2019, when you added Minkah Fitzpatrick, they jumped up to number 3. And part of that was because not just Minkah Fitzpatrick making a lot of spectacular plays, but because the Steelers defense was able to put a lid on so many more big passing plays over the top. And what killed them in so many games this past year was the big passing plays. You could think back to Nelson Aguilar burning Ahkello Witherspoon. You could think back to Minkah Fitzpatrick getting beat by Gabe Davis in the Bills game. Now, granted, the Bills game, it happened a lot in the Eagles game too, but the Bills and Eagles games, those were out of hand. We know those were games the Steelers weren't going to win unless a lot of crazy stuff happened. But the Patriots game wasn't a shining example of, man, if the Steelers defense could have just held that cap on, kept them from making the big plays, that could have been the game that the Steelers won. They win that game, they make the playoffs. This year, I think that they're putting themselves in a position where they do not want to give up the big plays. They want to be physical. They want to be aggressive. They don't want to be passive and let the other team dictate the pace of the game. But they're going to trust their corners, the veteran corners they brought in Patrick Peterson, the veteran corners they've kept in Witherspoon and Wallace. You're hoping Witherspoon can kind of bounce back from last year. You're going to trust Joey Porter to be part of that equation. But you have 3 veteran safeties that you have, Minkah Fitzpatrick leading them. You saw DeMonte KZ being a great fit for them last year in his roles across the field. And you brought in Keanu Neal, I think one thing the Steelers are going to have done, they've put themselves in a position where they have a lot of trustworthy guys who can keep the play in front of them while still letting certain players be aggressive. And that's where I think it's going to happen, is that those guys, the secondary, that is, they're going to keep the plays. Even the linebackers in the slot corner give up those underneath passes. What they're going to do is they're going to force teams to have to keep hitting those spots. They're going to force teams to have to keep throwing to the middle part of the field where more traffic can get there, and keep being accurate consistently throughout a game. And if they achieve their top goals, which are, as always, when you talk about the Steelers, stuff the run, get after the quarterback, create turnovers. If they do those three things, that will be the identity of this team. And if their biggest weakness is that their linebackers, whether or not Kwon Alexander's there or not, but if their linebackers and their slot corner are just getting picked apart in the middle part of the field at certain times, they can try to mitigate that and trust that, hey, you're not going to win all those matchups, but you can throw in some schematics, you can throw in some ways to help those guys, and you can trust that guys like TJ Watt, Cam Heyward, Alex Highsmith, Larry Ogunjobi, they're going to be getting in the backfield, and they're going to be disrupting some of those plays. And as we've seen before, sometimes they might even tip them or intercept them, as TJ Watt has sometimes done. And I don't know how he's done that more than once in his career. He's done it at least, I think, 3 or 4 times now, where he's just kind of seen the play coming, jumped up and intercepted at the line of scrimmage. It'd be like one of those plays where you're playing Madden, you just chuck the controller at the TV, because that's just like, there's no way anyone can do that, except TJ Watt does do that. But I say all that to say, I look at this defense as saying, again, you look at that one weakness right there, that one weak spot we're talking about. If that's the worst that they have, again, make sure that they stuff the run. They cannot be bad run stuffers. If these linebackers fail to get to the right holes, fail to get off their blocks, that is going to be a big problem. And then we will be talking about this a lot during the season. There is a chance that will happen. But I think that with the profiles that these guys bring, with the tape that I've seen of the 3 linebackers, and again, we're assuming that Kwon Alexander is a signee here. It hasn't happened yet. But even if they don't get Kwon Alexander, they bring in another vet. The guys that they've brought in, they're all guys that kind of fit that profile. You stuff the run, you're going to force teams to try to have to keep throwing over that middle, and then you can try to trick things out. You can create robber scenarios. And if you don't know what a robber concept is, it's basically when you're dropping down a safety into a role, or it could be a linebacker, but with the Steelers, it would be a safety because those are their coverage playmakers right now. But they'd be a person who drops to the middle part of the field, and their job is to just spy the quarterback, watch what they're doing, play an intermediate zone, and jump on those over the middle passes. And teams that are trying to line up the middle part of the field, especially if the Steelers do a really good job containing the edges, making sure that the quarterbacks can't escape the pocket. Their corners do a good job of limiting the easy passing windows down the sidelines, and the safeties do a good job of not allowing open receivers down the field. You could be putting yourself in a situation where teams are overly reliant on throwing over the middle part of the field, and then that's where Minkah Fitzpatrick has made some of his best plays, is jumping those passes when people think that he's going to one part of the field, but he's not. He's going to another part of the field. And that's also something that Terrell Austin, the Steelers defensive coordinator, used to be their secondary coach, specializes in. He's talked about trying to create those schematics and having guys in his secondary who he can trust to run those schematics, because it's not just the simple of, okay, yeah, we're going to drop this disguise where it's going to be cover 2, but we're switching to cover 1. You need guys who not only understand that you're doing that, but understand how to sell it in the right way. If you want an example, go back and look at Minkah Fitzpatrick's pick 6 of Joe Burrow. So that he was covering one part of the field, changed it up, and Joe Burrow didn't see it in time, jumped the pass, took it for a pick 6. There are things and ways and tells that you can give that when people study your tape, hey, I know that they're studying this part of our defense. They're studying this look from our defense, that I'm going to sell it. It's one thing and try to bait them into another. And that's one way to create interceptions. And we've talked about a lot this offseason. The main goal is going to be to create turnovers and make big plays with this defense. It's just the way of the NFL. Stuff the run. Don't let them get long drives by grinding you out. And, if they're going to dink and dunk, they're going to dink and dunk. But have guys who can make plays in the football, and whether they're pass rushers or guys in the secondary. And I think if this is the one weakness that the Steelers just are, all right, this is just who we are this year, they have enough strengths to corral that weakness into one spot and make it not the factor that becomes the kryptonite of their super defense that they're trying to build right now. We'll get to some talk about the offense, though, because Mason Rudolph supposedly back. Andrew Filippomi tweeted about that. I want to give you my thoughts on the potential return of Mason Rudolph to the Pittsburgh Steelers and what might be happening here with the Steelers offense in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stay with us. I'm Chris Carter, your host. I'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing our show here now. Another source of news, and Kwon Alexander was one from Adam Schefter. Andrew Filippomi, a radio host from 93.7 The Fan, tweeted out that he had a source that said that Mason Rudolph was set to return to the Steelers. Now, I just answered a question on this show, I believe over the weekend, where someone asked about what's the third quarterback spot looking like, and would it involve a guy like Matt Ryan? Well, Matt Ryan literally just signed a contract, or he's going to do football analysis, so he's definitely out. But I talked about the guys that they brought in, like Tanner Morgan, the quarterback out of Minnesota, or Bryce Jerkins, the guy that he's made a start for the Rams last year, been a young veteran that might be coming in here. But it looks like all that might be getting put to rest. The Steelers wanted to look at these guys, take a look and see, could they find a diamond in the rough quarterback? And it looks like they're bringing back Mason Rudolph, because Andrew Filippomi did tweet out, source, the Steelers are bringing back Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph coming back in, it's not a huge deal. I agree. But I think it's a solid move for the Steelers if they can afford it. And I think it's a lot like Terrell Edmunds from last year. Remember when he hit free agency, when we were wondering if he would be signed back, and then he was. I think they were letting Terrell Edmunds try out the free agency process because he wanted to see if he could make his money. And that's all that Mason Rudolph was doing. Mason Rudolph paid his dues with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, some people have gripes that say, like, hey, maybe he should have been given a chance to lead the Steelers offense. Well, I'd argue that he had his chances in the past years with, when Ben Roethlisberger was out for an entire year and things, kind of didn't go his way. But I think that Mason Rudolph was given his chances. I don't think the Steelers really did him dirty. I think that you could definitely point to some feuds he might have had with Ben Roethlisberger. But by and large, I truly think that Mason Rudolph, he kind of handled everything like a true pro. This is a guy who was drafted as the third round pick back in 2018, who made multiple starts, who got knocked out of a game, got clocked over the head with a helmet, took a lot of hits for the team, stepped up and a lot of times when he was needed, even when the offense wasn't playing well, and won some decent games here and there where he was coming in at cornerback and providing solid relief for Ben Roethlisberger. But then, of course, they bring in Mitch Trubisky and they draft Kenny Pickett in a year where Mason Rudolph could have looked at things and said, hey, maybe I'm going to be the starter. Maybe I'll be able to win the job. And then Mason Rudolph went into camp, battled it out, and eventually was third string to both Trubisky and Pickett for the entire year. And that's a tough pill to swallow. I know that people think that, oh, well, shucks, tough luck guy. But I think that, there's still a part of that that's like, if you want to be a human about it, this is a guy who he thought he could be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And he thought that he should be given the chance to prove that. And the Steelers didn't give it to him because they thought that these other guys were going to be better. So I never heard Mason Rudolph complain out loud and say, terrible things with the organization. And he could have, made a fuss. He could have done that in free agency. But I think you kind of saw with his free agency period, no one's picked him up. It's now May. Teams are about to get ready to head into their OTAs. So I think Mason Rudolph's in a position where, you know what? Maybe you are just a backup in the NFL, but backups still make pretty good money in the NFL. I mean, Mitch Trubisky right now is about to make $10 million off the Steelers. Now, I will pose this. There are some people who have been hitting me up on this podcast saying, Chris, they need to get rid of Mitch Trubisky's contract. They need to get rid of Mitch Trubisky's contract. He's a $10 million cap hit. And I've said, listen, backup quarterback is an important position in the NFL. We've seen it be an important position for the Steelers. We've seen it be an important position for other competing teams. The Steelers right now don't have a third-string quarterback. The bringing back of Mason Rudolph would be doing that. And so then it would become a question of, what do you do about Mitch Trubisky? Do you do anything? Because I think the Steelers would be happy with just having three veteran quarterbacks now, a second-year Kenny Pickett, a guy in Mitch Trubisky who came in and gave you some solid minutes last year, and Mason Rudolph, who at least knows your offense and knows how to operate and can carry himself in a game and not lose you the game. that's good depth to have. I think that's something that you kind of want to have in today's game, especially when, yes, the offensive line took strides last year, but you might have a rookie starting on it at left tackle. You might have some new coalescing to go down with Isaac Samalo and Broderick Jones. And, who knows how the offensive tackle thing works across the board with Dan Moore Jr. and Chooks and where they line up. There might be times where they give up a big pass rusher who clobbers a quarterback and maybe takes them out for a few plays. You need guys like that. And I think that Mason Rudolph coming back, well, I don't think it's going to be a major factor, but it can get you through in pinches. And I know that some people are saying, well, if the third string quarterback's in the game, doesn't that mean the Steelers have kind of already lost the season? Maybe. It depends on how long those players are out. But if you could think back to some of the Steelers Super Bowl years, there were times when Charlie Batch was coming in and giving solid relief. Byron Leftwich was coming in and giving solid relief. And those games helped keep the Steelers afloat and eventually what became really good playoff runs for the organization. So I say don't discount the possibility of Mason Rudolph being a decent impact here. Plus, again, you get another veteran quarterback for the mix. When you're testing out your scout teams and everything, they're going to know exactly where to be. That's a solid asset to have, and we see where that goes. But I think it's still ultimately a good thing the Steelers, if they are able to bring back Mason Rudolph, especially I don't expect it to be an expensive price. It can be just another 1-year deal. Minimal contract that just you pay him to come in, see how it goes. There's no questions about it. You don't have to worry about anything, and you just get back to work there on offense with running everything. So all that being said, I don't think that's huge of a deal that's going to change the whole complexion of everything that the Steelers have. But I do think that it would be a very solid move on the part of Omar Khan, just to make sure that they do have a complete depth chart of quarterbacks that they know and trust moving forward. All that, thank you very much for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're going to have a special episode tomorrow. Joe Marino of Draft Dudes with our guy Kyle Krabs. They did a preview episode, not a preview episode, but they did their own breakdown, scouting the Steelers for the strengths and weaknesses of the team and what they think the team will be this upcoming year. I'm going to take them to task and talk to Joe about what they said. So if you want to go check out what they said, go check out Draft Dudes. It's one of our Locked On Podcast Network's great shows. They do a lot of great scouting in the NFL draft. They have a lot of great insights. I listen to them myself to help kind of hone my own research. But we're gonna talk to Joe about some of the things that he said, some things that I think, and maybe get a little bit of combination of inside and outside perspectives on your Pittsburgh Steelers. All that on the Wednesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Again, thank you for checking out the Tuesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Again, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can find me on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, where I cover Pitt Athletics, and you can find my work there as well. You can also find this show, the Locked On Steelers podcast, on your favorite podcasting app, and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. And if you want to help us out even further, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. Do both at the same time, and you get a shout out at the end of the show. Like this person, we got DT234567, Steelers fan, draft lover, 5 stars. It says, Chris Carter, you absolutely nailed it in this draft season. Like Omar Khan, artist, you picked the perfect draft just like Omar. Well done, my favorite Steelers podcast for sure. Thank you very much for your review, DT. We got one more that we'll read out later tomorrow on the podcast, because we appreciate all of our 5-star reviews. Again, leave a 5-star review with a positive comment. Both of those get you a shout at the end of the show. And if you want to support our campaign that we have going here, we're raising money to help fight against cystic fibrosis and help find the cure. If you want to donate to that campaign, if you're watching on YouTube, use the QR code on screen or use the website below the QR code. It's also in the description if you just need a quick, easy link to click. Whether you're listening to this podcast on an audio platform, the description will be the website will be in the description there on your podcasting app, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can find it in the description of that as well to submit your donation. And again, if you want to use your donation to guarantee that you have a question asked that'll get answered on the show, call 412-223-6644 and give a $10 donation or more. Your question will be guaranteed to be answered by me on the air within a week of your donation. Thanks again for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Back again tomorrow talking more about your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.